It's Bot Games Season 4, Challenge 3, or Week 3 solution tutorial, okay? Let's jump into solving this automation resiliency challenge. First off, I want to talk about some of the objectives and the requirements here. So the story behind this one was that we are working for a financial services company called Spacely Financial Services, and they are using a SaaS-based CRM. And with that comes the subscription to a SaaS-based application and the recognition that that SaaS company, whoever's providing this fictional CRM to them, has the ability to make changes to the hosted application at any time, right? So they might make changes to the way that the form is laid out, or to where a button is, or to the structure of the page. And so the challenge or the premise behind this is that we want to continue to be able to fill data into this CRM regardless of any changes that may be pushed out by this CRM SaaS-based company. Okay, so the real objective here is to make sure that we can keep our automation running, and we want to keep it entering data despite any application page changes. And so I know that a lot of people had some trouble with this one this week. I want to do a tutorial to show exactly how we think about solving this one and how you might use this same kind of approach in future automation builds so that you can add additional layer of resiliency into your automations. Sound good? Let's jump right into the tutorial then. All right, so I am using Community Edition, and this is my Community Edition control room. We're going to start off by creating our automation. I've also got the resiliency challenge page up. The URL for this is in the description below. So if you don't have this URL, hit that link and make sure you're here. It should look very similar to what I've got up right here. So those are the only two windows that I have open, and I'm using Google Chrome for this one. All right, the first thing I want to do is go to the automation tab here on the far left side. And I'm going to go to Bot Games. I don't have a folder for this one yet, so I'm going to create a new folder called season_4. This part doesn't matter for you, right? Like, you don't have to do a Bot Games folder inside of your root of bots and season 4. Like, you can name it whatever you want. The important thing to take away here is that you want to be consistent with where you're storing automations and have some organization here, right? I will be shamed by looking at the root of my bots directory and all of these random bots. Like, I have no idea what most of these are. Obviously, I created them, but some of them have been created 3 years ago. So I have no idea what those are. Big takeaway here, just make sure you're organizing your automations in a decent way. All right, I'm going to create a automation here, and I'm going to name this one like I would name an episode of a TV series. Let's call this one Bot Games S4C3, right? Season 4, Challenge 3. Resiliency Challenge probably would have been a better name, but that's fine. All right. As you know, if you've watched any of our build tutorials before, I am huge on making sure that we start with steps, because by using the steps, we can start to break out, like, what is our logic and how are we thinking through this? And then we just go in and fill in the specific actions later, okay? So let me show you this challenge page real quick, all right? What we need to do, first we need to launch this page. So we got to copy this URL. I'm going to copy that right now because we will have to launch that. We're going to download this spreadsheet. Now I'm going to get a little bit fancy with downloading the spreadsheet. I'm only going to download it if I don't have it locally already. I don't want to just keep downloading more and more copies of this and then not use them. So we're going to add a little extra logic to check to see if we have this already. If we don't, we will download it. We want to read that spreadsheet. I've got a copy of it right here, right? We've got customer name, company name, customer ID, primary contact, street address, right? We've got all the data we need in this spreadsheet. So we need to loop through that, read all of that data, and fill this form. Now, what I want you to see is that as we hit add, notice that some of the fields start to move around a little bit. And that's part of the challenge with this, right? The form has changed. Now, is this extreme? Yeah, right. This isn't going to be a real application that you are subscribed to as a SaaS-based application that has that kind of changes. But the takeaway here is we want to teach you to think about what is my automation going to do in spite of user interface changes? And how can I make sure that my automation can keep running without me always having to like, okay, we got to do more maintenance. We got to take this bot out of production. I got to make some changes and then we got to push it back up, right? So is there a way that we could add resiliency to our automations without having to make those changes all the time? And could the automation fix itself? So that's what we're going for. All right, I'm also going to refresh this because we want to fill this form out like the normal style first, and then we'll start to think about what happens once it starts to move around. So we're going to click this add button every single time that we've got a customer. I don't want to hard code like there's 8 customers, so I'm going to do this 8 times. What we want to do is just every single time we fill the form, we're going to click add. Once we've added all of our customers, we will finally hit the submit button, and that's the end. Okay? So let's take a look at this one and start to break it up into some steps. So the first step we want to do, and I've got this on the left-hand side here for my step. I'm going to drag a couple of these over and we'll just keep renaming them. I like to build in flow view for the most part. I will put up dual view so that you can see it both ways. You're welcome to build either way. I like flow view a lot because I think it does a good job of showing me where like a step or a loop or a conditional statement starts and ends. But some people will say that that's heresy because they love list view. So that's fine. All right. First thing we want to do is launch and download. And that's going to be launching the challenge page and then downloading that CSV or that spreadsheet. The next thing we're going to do is read customer data. Okay. There's a couple ways we could do that. I'm thinking through different ways we could approach it, but we will read all the customer data here. The next thing we want to do is loop and enter. And that's going to be where we're looping through all of the customer records and entering them into that web form. And then the final thing we're going to do here is submit. And that's going to be where we just click that button to submit the challenge page is finally done. Seems easy so far, right? So this is how I build, right? I'll just map it out like that. Like, all right, that's where my head's at right now. I know that this loop and enter one probably is going to get a little more complicated than we have. So we'll add some extra steps inside of that once we get to that point. For right now, though, I'm going to start with a conditional statement because what I want to do here is say, if I don't have that file already, I want to download it. So before we get to that, I like to store a lot of those downloads in like a ctemp directory. And that way, when someone else takes my automation and tries to run it, it's going to work just out of box. It's not like a dependency on C Micah Smith or C user Micah Smith documents, downloads, whatever. It's going to be in the root of the temp directory. And this way, it will work consistently regardless of which machine it's running on. So I've got a new folder down here. Let's give that a name of Bot Games Season 4 C3, whatever. That's fine. You can call it whatever you want, just as long as you can find it is the big key here, right? So I'm going to use that and I'm going to check for a condition. And my condition is going to be if file does not exist. So I'm checking for the opposite, right? I'm checking to make sure the file does not exist. I'm going to fill in that path there. And then I'm also going to copy whatever the name is of this file. So let's go back to our challenge page. The name of file is resiliency-challenge.csv. I can see that at the bottom when I'm mousing over it. I can also just download it. Let's just download it just so we have it. So if I show in folder, okay, I'm going to copy the name of that and paste that in here because that's the file I'm checking for. Now, it's kind of a weird thing to set that up right now because we don't have the file in the path that we are looking for. So if I just hit browse, that's not really going to work very well. But this is the target path. And the first time we run this, we wanted to actually download that file. So that's why I'm kind of putting a path in here that is aspirational in that we don't have a file there yet. All right. If the file does not exist, I want to download it. Now, At this point in our logic, we have not actually launched the challenge page. So what I'm going to do instead is use the browser action for that. So I'm going to right click right here and say copy. Let's see. Actually, for some reason, it's showing a different path. I'm going to refresh one more time here. Now I'm going to right click and say copy link address. And what I'm going to do is, using the browser package here, there's an action that says download file. And the URL of the file is going to be what I just copied, which is that full path resiliency challenge CSV. And my save to location is actually going to be the exact same thing we have right here. So I'm just going to copy that over. If you wanted to put that in a variable and do it that way, you absolutely could. Because this is really, I guess I'll be using this in 3 total places, right? I'll be using it here, I'll be using it to open the file, and I'll be using it in my conditional statement. So you could do it that way. I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so if we don't have the file, we're going to download it. The reason I'm doing it that way is because challenge pages are based on me launching it and the clock starting, right? If I don't launch the page yet, this is my way of like maybe shaving a couple seconds off. The next thing we want to add is actually opening up the challenge page. So I'm going to, outside of my conditional statement, add a browser open action. I'm going to go back here and copy the URL of the challenge page itself and paste that in. You could leave it on default browser. I personally like to always be really specific that I'm using Google Chrome. I also like it to be in a new window just because I don't want it to open up on a tab and then like maybe I want to look at my code. I have to switch back and forth between tabs. So I prefer always having a new window. All right, look at that. 1/4 of our build is done. If only that were true. All right, launch and download is done though, so we will minimize that one. The other thing I like about steps is that if I'm going to talk about my logic with someone, right? Like maybe I'm working with a business analyst or the stakeholder who is going to be the recipient or the beneficiary of this automation. And they say, what did you do? I can just show them this like minimized and be like, hey, really basically, we're just going to download the file and launch that page. We're going to read the customer data. We're going to loop through the spreadsheet, enter all the data, and submit, right? That makes for a really easy story and flowchart of like what my automation is doing. If they really want to dive into the details of what's happening in each step, that's cool. But this is like kind of a way of forcing me to have some type of commenting because I'm terrible at commenting as a lot of developers are. So it's good to have it that way. All right, off my soapbox on that one. We're going to read customer data. There's a couple ways we could do that. One is we could actually do it while we're looping. I like to actually read this beforehand and then work with a data table. So what I'm going to do is open the file and I will choose desktop file. What I'm going to do here is actually copy the path from where we downloaded it to. So it's going to be right here. And this would be a reason why you'd want to use a variable here. Let's go back to this one. Desktop location right there. So that's going to be the CSV path. And I know we don't have a file in that path right now, but we will. The next question we have to answer is, does this have a header? And by reviewing the file, I can see that yes, it does have a header. So we want to make sure to check that box. What that means for us is that when we're looping through this, we don't want to loop through the header row. It also enables us to reference the data based on its header. I personally don't do that very much, but you would be able to do that. All right, and it is a CSV, so we're good there. I'm going to hit save. Next thing we want to do is read the contents of that file. So I'll drag that over. I read it to a variable. Notice we don't have a variable here yet for a data table. So I'm going to click the plus button to create a new data table. And I'm going to name this TBL customer data and hit create and select. Cool. So we have now read the contents of that into our data table, and then I'm going to close that session. You could probably get away without closing this one, but it's always a good habit to make sure you close anything that you're opening, because if we were to read another CSV in this file and we had incidentally reused the session name of default, we don't want to have a mix-up of like, which CSV are we talking about here? And you would actually get an error. So we've read that. All right, at this point, we have 2 of our steps done. Now, when we get to our loop and enter, we have, at this point, downloaded the file, launched the page, and we have a variable, which is a data table, that has all of the contents of our CSV here, right? So we basically have a data table that is essentially just like a spreadsheet, right? It's just a series of rows and columns that has data in it. And we want to loop through that to enter that data onto the form. So let's go ahead and add a loop action. I'm going to drag that guy over. And for my iterator, we want to loop, and here we want to find data table. So for each row in a table, that's what we're going to list through. Now, the other way we could have done this is we could have just read directly from the CSV itself and just loop through that way. We're just doing it this way because this is how I like to separate things out. All right, now it says, which table are you looking to loop through? We're going to select TBL customer data. Minimize that real quick. And then we have to choose a record. Now, there's 2 ways you could approach this. One is you could read these variables to multiple variables, and you would just have to set all of those up here with a key and variable to map to. I'm just going to, for right now, set these to a record. And we're going to call this one our customer record. I always prefix the variable type with some lowercase characters. That way, when I'm just looking at variables, I can kind of know what they are. But notice you do have icons here for each of these, so it's not impossible to tell the difference between them. Maybe it's a bit of overkill, but I'm cool with that. All right, so at this point, we are looping through each row in our table. Now, what do we want to do in each row in our table? Let's add some steps here. We want to fill basic customer data. We want to check boxes and radio. And we want to click add. That one might be a little bit overkill just because it's only a single action that's going to be in there. But this is the basic stuff we want to do, right? We want to go in this form. We want to fill out all of this customer data. We want to take care of our radio button and our checkbox where we're going to have to basically do some conditional statements. And then we want to click the add button. All of that happens for each row in our data table. So let's start to do this fill basic customer data. What I'm going to do is go to the recorder package and add the capture action. And here we select which window we want to interface with. I'm going to click browser, select from the drop down once we've hit the refresh button. I want to use this resiliency challenge. Cool. So resiliency challenge is selected. I'm going to click on capture object. Notice it's going to bring this screen or this window to the forefront. I want to highlight over the object I want to interface with, in this case, company name. And when I see the red box, I can click it. Okay. The action to take, I want to set text. Now it says, what text do you want to set here? I'm going to press the F2 button, which will bring up our variables explorer. And I want to set a value from our record. Now, when we think of what a record actually is, a record is essentially a single row of data. So this is a record, what I've just highlighted here. And I can reference that by the name of each column based on the header, or I can do it based on the index. And an index is 0 based. So the company name would be 0, the customer ID would be 1, the primary contact would be 2, etc. Right? So I like to do it by index personally. That way, in case the header names change, my automation isn't broken. I'm not saying that's a perfect fix for resiliency for automations. It could be that the order of the columns changes, and then my approach would break and someone else's might work because they used header names. But anyway, I'm going to do this based off index, and that way we can easily count through these, and we don't have to worry about like maybe keystroke errors in the way that we're spelling the header names. So the customer record is index 0, and that's represented here by these square brackets and a 0 inside. Note below here, I have some other details, right? I can see that the DOM-X path is referencing an ID of company name. I'm going to copy that out, and we're going to use that later. But for right now, I'm just going to put it in an empty notepad document, okay? So I've got this empty notepad document. I've copied it and put it right here. We will use that later. We're going to repeat this process a total of 7 times actually, because we've done 1. So I'm just going to paste a couple of these. I'm going to highlight that particular step, Control C, Control V. It's added a new one. Oh, but because I didn't save it yet, it's like thinking it's a brand new one. So let me remove that. Now I've highlighted it, copied it. I'm going to paste it. And now it's already got everything filled out, right? It's got the customer record, it's got the page, everything like that. What I'm going to do is just click Recapture Object. And this time I want to select the customer ID. Okay. The nice thing about this is it's kept my variable here for what I want to enter. It's updated all of the references for where it can find that object on the page. And so really all I have to do is just change this from a 0 to a 1, right? And if we think back why I'm doing that, Pathfinder Roofing and Siding was my company name, so that was 0. Customer ID is 1, and that's the field that I'm working with right now, customer ID. So I just changed that to a 1. Like we did last time, I'm going to copy this DOM-X path. I'm going to save it into my spreadsheet. Again, we will use that later. All right, click Save. Those first 2 are done. I'm going to copy and paste that again. Click Recapture Object. Select Primary Contact this time. Click it. And just update this. Primary Contact is in position 2, I believe, or index 2, which is right here. And the last thing I want to do here is just copy that DOM-X path, paste in our notepad because we will use it later. All right, we're going to keep going. If you want to fast forward through this part, you will not hurt my feelings. If you're watching this on replay, if you're watching it live, you are stuck doing this with me. All right, record 3. Actually, did we actually capture it yet? Email address right here. We could have just had a bug in the code. All right, that one's been updated. I have changed it to 3 here. Email address I can see is set correctly down here. We will paste that into our list of DOM-X paths. If it's a regular automation build, I'm not going to be so crazy as to copy the DOM-X path out every single time and paste it in. But as you're probably familiar with, if you've tried out this challenge at all, you know that this one gets weird really quickly. So that's why I'm pasting those out. We're going to be referencing them soon. All right. We just did email. The next one is street address. Let's check back here. Street address is 0, 1, 2, 3. You know what? We screwed up email. All right. Street address is 3. We'll go back and address email in just a second. All right. So we're good on that one. The email address is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is the position or the index. So email address is the one we have to update right here. And I'm going to scroll up so you can see that. There we go. Apologies if you can't read my screen all the time. That one is going to be index 7 for email address. So if you're following along with me, you should have index 0, index 1, index 2, index 7, index 3. You could do these out of order and that would be fine too. But I'm doing them in order so that as the form fills, we're kind of following along. And street address is the ID there. All right, let's copy and paste that one more time. Capture object. We're going to look for city. City is at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll put customer record 4 here and copy that XPath. I think we have 2 more maybe. We got to do state. So recapture object. Here's my state. Now notice that state is a little bit different than these other fields. It's actually a select, or it's a drop down. It is not a normal input. So instead of the action of setting text, I have to actually select item by text. And in this case, I'm just going to copy the same variable I was using above, and I'll just change the index. State is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. I'm going to copy my XPath. Again, we want to pay close attention to the fact that this one is a select for its DOM XPath instead of an input. Save that. I will paste one more time here and recapture object. Let's do the zip. Boom. Zip is located in position 6, I believe. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's going to be index 6 here. And then I'm going to copy the zip XPath. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Should have all of those covered now. We have 8 fields, so we're good there. All right, so we got this first part of the build set. I'm just going to save this. Okay. The next thing I want to take care of is clicking the checkboxes and radio. So I'm going to start by adding a conditional statement. And the first one we'll take care of, we'll just go by order here. What is this first one? Offers discount. So offers discount is this set of radio buttons right here. What I want to do is add a conditional statement to check for a string. I know that that might not be the most obvious thing, but really what I'm doing is checking a string that is located in a record. So I'm going to select customer record, go by index, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is my discount field. So I'm going to put an 8 right here. And if that is equal to yes, oops, make sure I spell that right. I can match case. It really doesn't matter. I wouldn't want to be so specific here. So I'm just going to uncheck the match case, but I did put yes in all caps. If that is equal to yes, what I want to do, I want to click the yes radio button. So I've added a new capture step here. I'm going to select Resiliency Challenge, capture object, and then I'm just going to click on this yes radio button. For my action to take, I'm just going to select. You can select or click. Either of those should work. Actually, let's do click. And I'm going to leave all of the path and details like that alone here. Now, this is an area where I like flow view specifically. I need an else condition here because not everyone is an active discount customer. So I'm going to add an else condition. For flow view, just drag that right next to the if statement. I'm going to copy my recorder action here and paste it and recapture object. This will be selecting the no option. Okay. And again, my action is click. That was already set. So I'm good to go. We're going to have one more conditional statement after that one, which is to see if the customer has a non-disclosure agreement signed. So what I'm going to do is add another conditional statement based on a string. And this one will be my record variable, index 9. We'll triple check that. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If that is equal to yes, what do we want to do? We want to click the checkbox. So I'm just going to paste another capture action down here. I will click on recapture object, highlight over that little checkbox right there. You can see it has a red outline around it. Click the box and check will be my action. All right, the last thing we need to do is click the add button for a customer to be added to my records. I'm going to select Resiliency Challenge. I will click Capture Object, highlight over that add button, And my action to take is going to be click and save. All right. Now, before we add too much extra crazy logic to this, let's close the challenge page and run our automation. And what we want to do here is make sure that what we've got running so far is at least working. And we want to see how our automation right now handles when that page changes a little bit. So it's looking to do the capture for all of our company details. It's filling all that in correctly, so great. Yours may have gotten through 2 of them just based on the randomness of this page. Mine only got through 1, and then it started to have some issues. Okay, now notice it's going to have a timeout here. By default, that timeout is set to 15 seconds, so it's going to try for 15 seconds to find that object based on the object properties that it knows about. Okay, so let's go back to review the object properties that it knows about. And here it says, I can't find that text box. The search criteria did not match. Okay, let's break that down. So it's trying to find, it had an error right here on line 12. It's trying to find that input field based on these object properties. And these object properties represent the search criteria that it's looking off of. So it's looking for an input with the ID of company name. If we go back to this challenge page, we can identify what is the ID for company name. I right-clicked and selected Inspect, and that brings up my Chrome DevTools. Yours may be a docked DevTools window. That's totally fine. You're seeing the same stuff either way. But notice that when I scroll down here, the ID for this field is now something totally different, right? It's a totally random set of characters. And notice that it also has like all of these spans, and it's not the same location that it used to be. Now, technically on the form, company name was always right here as company name, but the path to it is different and its ID has changed. Is this an extreme example? Absolutely. You're not going to likely see this in a lot of SaaS-based applications that you're using, but what you will see is that, hey, the form that used to be up here and had the following DOM-X path now is moved down here and has a different DOM-X path, and now my automation is fragile and may not work. And so what we want to think about is how can we use generative AI to add stability and resiliency to my automation? So we know that this has now been changed. How do we deal with it? I'm going to minimize that. We'll look at it here in a minute. I'm going to move this to the side, and let's think about what we could do here. So we're inside of a loop. We just detected an error. Whenever we're detecting errors and we're not catching them, it means that we don't have any error handling in place. So what we're going to do is add an error handler here. And I'm going to add a try right inside my loop, but above my fill customer data stuff. And for right now, I'm just going to minimize my fill customer data, clicking add, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to drag all 3 of these actions. So I did a click and then a shift click on the bottom one. I'm going to drag them inside of the try, which means that if we detect an error in any of these actions, we're going to jump over to this catch block. What do we want to do in the catch block? Well, what I'd like to do is I want to extract the page source here, right? I want to get the code from this page. I'm going to send the code to this page to ChatGPT, and I'm going to say, hey, ChatGPT, I can't find the company name, the email address, the primary contact, all of these fields. I can't find them. Send me back the DOM-X path for all of these fields based on the code that I'm giving you. Return that to me in a JSON, right? Which is a JavaScript object notation, so that I know how to read them back once I get them back from you. I'm going to read all of those, and I'm going to update my code to use these new paths, so that ideally, even if my bot fails the first time on trying to fill out some of this data, as a part of its error handling, it's going to be able to get the correct DOM-X path for all of these fields. We will let that run again and try to fill it out correctly, right? Instead of having just like a hard failure like we just had, or having the bot just completely bomb out and say, human needs to do this work, okay? So let's think through the steps that we would do to do that. First off, I'm going to add some steps here. The first one, we want to get page source. Okay, I need to get the source code for this page. Admittedly, when I thought through like how would we create this challenge and how would we solve it, I had to figure out that there is actually a really easy way to get the page source. So I'm going to show you that. The next thing we want to do is clean page source. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that because we don't want to send the entire page to ChatGPT, especially if we're concerned with how many tokens we're using with ChatGPT, or the page might be enormous and we might go over the tokens that ChatGPT can handle. So I'm going to clean up the page source a little bit to try to make this as fast as possible. Next thing I'm going to do, invoke ChatGPT. Okay, that's where I'm going to send it my request or my prompt with, hey, this is the page source. It's been cleaned. What do I want out of this? And then the last thing I want to do is parse my response. Okay. So we've got a couple more steps to fill out here. Let's get into it. The first one here is getting the page source. So there's actually a really easy way to do that. And within the browser package, there is an action that says get source code. Okay. And I choose exactly which tab I want to do that with. It's going to be Resiliency Challenge, the one we've been working with. I'm not working with a specific iframe here, so I don't have to set that one. But I do have to set an output variable. And I'm going to call this one sPageSource. And what that's going to return to me is essentially the entire source code of the page. So if we go back to my developer console and I scroll all the way up to the top, click on HTML and click Edit as HTML, I can select all and copy. I'll leave it open for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that into a Visual Studio code, just empty document, because we want to evaluate it a little bit. And I'm going to scroll over to the left here. If yours is not formatted cleanly, you can right click and select Format Document. If you want to just follow along with me so you can just see what we're looking for here, that's cool too. What I want to look at though is all the way down here at the bottom. And notice that here I've got my start registration form or start register form, right? And I can see customer details. And if I go back and look at the actual challenge page itself, oh, customer details, please fill in customer data. Please fill in customer data. So this is a good indicator that within my code, this is where the form starts. And if I scroll down a bit, I can see all of those fields we were just looking at, right? Like we looked at company name. And I can see company name as a label, and below that I see all the crazy characters that are now the ID for company name as a field. So I want to get all of that, and I can see that I have end register form down here. So I really am just concerned with sending ChatGPT this part, right? And that'll help to keep our tokens low, and we won't run into an issue where we've sent too big of a request to ChatGPT. So let's clean up that source code a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding a string action. And I'm going to select extract text. Okay. Now with extract text, what happens is I'm giving a source string. So I'm going to select sPageSource because that's all of the code that we just got from that page. And I can select to get everything before, everything after, or a combination of before and after. Now, again, going back to our code here, I'm going to grab this. I'll just copy it. The start, actually, I don't want the preceding space even. I'm just going to copy it right there. Start register form. I'm going to paste that right here because it says start after text, which means once it finds this in the entire source code, I want it to start capturing stuff. And then I'm going to select and for my option right here because I want it to end before the end part. So what I'm going to do is go find that end part right here, end register form. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste that right here. So what that should give me is just the code for that part of the form. I'm going to hit save here. The last thing we need to do here is make sure that we're assigning that output to a variable. I'm going to assign it back to where it came from, which is my S page source. Good, you can see that. So I'm going to copy it back there. Hit save. Now we've cleaned that up. Okay, so what's happening here? If we have an error, we're going to grab the page source. We're going to clean the page source. Now we want to invoke ChatGPT. If you're using Community Edition, you should see that there is an OpenAI package already installed. If you're not using Community Edition, you can download this from Bot Store, and you can use this. It's a free package to download and use. Technically, you could do this with GPT-3. I'm going to be using ChatGPT action. The difference is this is set to work with GPT-3. This one is set to work with GPT 3.5 or GPT-4, which enables you to do conversation as opposed to this as single request. So I'm going to do ChatGPT here, drag that over. Again, because I'm using the dual view, I can drag it to other side. It really doesn't, or either side. It really doesn't matter. For my Open API key, you will have to register for the Open API developer access. I have my key in this other screen. I'm just going to copy and paste it over here. It's in an insecure string. On a real production build, I'm always going to be using credentials for these kind of things and pulling it from a credential vault. But I am building Community Edition right now, and this is just for tutorial purposes. Now, my message. This is where we want to be really specific. And this is where I think we've seen the best tips from the community during this past week and for challenge weeks 1 and 2, where people are sharing what are the prompts, how are they doing this so it works so well. So what I'm going to say is return the, actually let's say find the DOMX path for, and I want to bring up my notepad document so I know all of these field names. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to bring up the actual form itself so we can see this. And maybe I'll write my prompt elsewhere too. All right, too many things going on. What I'm going to do is put this up here. I'm going to bring my notepad document. We're just going to write our prompt here and then we'll paste it in. So find the DOMX path for company, space name, email address, primary contact, customer ID, state, city zip, what's the last one? Street address. These are kind of out of order from where they were originally. That's the beauty. I'm going to refresh so they go back to the normal order. That's the beauty of working with JSON is however it's returned to us, the order really doesn't matter because we have basically it's key valued kind of data. And so we can find that specific object and it doesn't matter what order it's in. So find the DOMX path for company name, and I'm going to put at the end here fields based on the following HTML. And this is where we'll put our variable for that S page source. We'll fill that in once we move to pasting this in here. Now, I'm going to be even more specific here because I'm going to say return this to me as a JSON using the following format. I want to be crazy specific in what I expect of ChatGPT because that way my automation knows how to interpret these results. So I'm going to add an open curly bracket. I'll do 2 spaces and then do company name. And then I'm going to be very specific about the output that I want. And the way that I'm going to do that is copy it from right here. And instead of company name here as the ID, I'm just going to put XXXXX and hope that ChatGPT can figure that out. Okay, I'll put a comma. So this is the format that we want to follow over and over again. And I'm just going to copy this. Actually, I'll copy the whole line so it's easy. I'm going to paste this a couple times here because this is the format. We're going to put this entire JSON, like exactly what we need. So company name was the first one, primary contact. We've already screwed up our order. All right, email address. We'll just mix up those last two. Again, it doesn't really matter, but I just want to make sure we're getting everything that we need. The only weird one is going to be state because it is a select, not an input. Customer ID, we'll just do state last to make it really complex, right? If there's an easy way to do this, let's do the opposite. All right, let's copy a couple more of these guys. We have 8 in total. We have 5 on there. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll have our close curly bracket. We'll do zip. That's not it. Let's just put zip right here. And then street address. We missed that. So I'm going to put that correctly here. And I will put the entire prompt that I'm using in the description below. So if you want to just copy it instead of writing it all out like I am, you can do that. The last one here is state. Remember that state is actually a select. It's not an input. So we're going to specify that for ChatGPT as well. That state should be an input or a select. So there we go. That's going to be our prompt. And we don't need this comma at the end because that's actually a malformed JSON. If we want to validate our JSON, we can do that. Usually you can just find like JSON validator online. This is always a good practice. So I'll put here, paste that in, and validate JSON. It says valid JSON. So that means at least we don't have any weird like, oh, I have 2 closing quotes, and that's why I used single quote inside of here because that is a proper JSON. So let's close that guy. Let's go back to our notepad. Again, I will put all of this in the notes below so you have that. All right, we're good there. Let's go back to this. I'm going to paste that in. The one thing we are missing here is we have that space for where our HTML is. This is where I'm going to put F2 and insert our S page source. So we're giving it the instruction of all of the data we want to grab. And Grammarly has some feedback for me, so I'll take that suggestion. And then return this to me in a JSON using the following format. All right, that should be good. We'll test that here in a second just to make sure it's working. The last thing I want to do is I'm going to take this session off. Sessions work well if I'm trying to do that back and forth like conversation with ChatGPT, meaning that like the thing that I mentioned before, right? Tell me about the LA Lakers. And then the next part of the conversation is who's their best player, right? Who's their best player would be answered in the context of tell me about the LA Lakers. That makes sense for a conversation. We're not doing a conversation in this particular use case, so we don't want to use a session here. The last thing we need to do is select a variable for where we want this to be come back to us. Let's say S ChatGPT response. Now, let's do a little bit of testing to make sure this actually works. A couple things I'm going to do. I'm going to add some message boxes in here. This one, I want to show the results of the ChatGPT response to make sure it's something that we can parse correctly and it's what we expect. I'm going to do the same thing with the cleaning of page source. So I want to make sure that page source looks like what I'm expecting it to look like. So S page source. And the last thing I'm going to do here is on my fill basic customer data. I don't want to wait 15 seconds for this thing to keep trying when it has that error. I'm going to change this to 5. I'm only doing it for that very first field, which is my company name, but I'm going to set that to 5. Let's hit save. I'm going to close the challenge page. I'm going to run my automation. And here I'm just trying to make sure, am I getting the page source correctly? Am I extracting the part of it that I want correctly? And then am I actually able to get the response that I expect from ChatGPT? All right, so the first one filled correctly. The next one, we've already seen some movement here. So this is not the same order that we originally had. This is my resiliency challenge container, and this is just the code that is inside this form here. So that looks correct. The cleaning has happened like I expected. At this point, we're going to prompt ChatGPT, and we got a 401 unauthorized. All right, let's regenerate a API key. New API key. You know what? I think I copied that incorrectly. That was my fault. The other key would have worked. I didn't have that SK prefix. All right, let's run this one more time. That was on me. I didn't notice that on my notes over here. All right, we got a new key. I'm confident this is going to work this time. Okay, we're going to find the company name. So by randomness, we did get the same location of those fields 2 times in a row. The third time, it has changed. So here we got the code correctly. This is what we expected. Now we're prompting ChatGPT to get the DOMX paths, or specifically the object IDs for those fields. Sometimes it takes a little bit to respond. Sometimes it's instant. Here's the response. And this is exactly what we were hoping for. Now, I don't want my bot to keep going because it's going to keep erroring out and we're going to be stuck in a loop here. So what I'm going to do is copy this, hit close. I'll come back here. Our automation failed. Yeah, we get it. All right, so I'm going to put this into my notes here. And this is what I'm getting. Now, I left that challenge page up because I want to check just to double verify that company name has this WQJU DOMX path. So let's go right here, inspect, WQJU PC, that worked. Let's check another random one. Let's go down here to the street address. And it's going to be this one. And we've got a lot of like weird divs and spans, and that is a bit obsessive, or excessive, I should say. AZMO. Yep, that matches. So we're good. ChatGPT got us the data that we needed, so it was correct there. Now, let's think about our logic here. I'm going to minimize some stuff. We're going to parse this JSON first, actually, though. So let's do that. Parse JSON response. In parsing a JSON, what we're doing is we're reading all of these values out, so we have these new object IDs. So let's go back here. I'm going to go to the JSON package. That's the official one. These other ones are from BotStore. You can use those if you want to. I'm just going to use the official JSON one right here. We're going to go to start session. When we start a session, I can do it based on text. I could do it based on a JSON file that I might have stored someplace. I'm going to do it based on text. Press F2 and select S ChatGPT response. That will be a valid JSON like we just copied out there, and hit save. It's going to start a session that is called default. Now I want to get node value. Now, the way that I get node value is a little bit different here. I have to use a bracket notation because some of my fields have spaces in them. I guess I could have written this a different way where they didn't have spaces, but that's not how we did it. So what I'm going to do is my notation here, I want to get company name. I'm going to put it in double quotes in bracket notation here. Okay. And where I want to save that, I'm going to create a new variable called S company name _ DOMX and hit create and select. I'm going to repeat that for all of these fields, all 8 of them, right? So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste this 7 more times after I save it. All right, I've got all of them there. We'll switch over to list view for a little bit here so we can see all of this stuff. Company name is done. My next one here is primary contact. It's easy just to copy these directly from the output from ChatGPT, so I make sure I get that correct. Same thing, I'm going to create a new variable, s primary contact underscore domx. I'm just naming them consistently so I can make sure that I've got like the same thing every single time. Email address. Customer ID. It's probably best just to copy and paste them, but here I am doing the opposite. Customer ID, domx. City. Now technically I think for city we wouldn't have to put it in this bracket notation because it has no spaces, but I'm just going to follow the same pattern the whole time. City, domx. The other important thing we want to make sure we do, and I'm going to say it because I'm going to speak it into existence, is we do have to make sure that we actually end the session for our JSON, because this is going to exist inside of a loop. And so we don't want to mix up what we're doing with the next iteration of the loop. All right, company name. Zip, street address, I'm going to copy because I want to make sure I get that right. Sometimes I can't spell address. And this would be s street address, domx, create and select. I know that some people like to use a package, I think that's on Bot Store, that is a JSON to dictionary. Yeah, right here, JSON parser. So that's also another way you could do this, is you could basically use the JSON to dictionary and do it that way. Because we didn't build ours that way to start, I'm not messing with that. State, I think it's also a Bot Store package. So I'm trying to show you how to do this with just the out-of-box stuff. State underscore domx. Save. All right, so now we have a bunch of variables that we've created for each of the fields and representative of their domx path. Like we said before, we do want to make sure we close our session. So I'm going to add that right down here. End session of default. Okay, so we've started a session with the JSON package. We are also ending that session. So that should enable us to read all of our values. I'm going to minimize some of this stuff because we're going to have a conversation on how this can work now. Focusing on flow view now, let's think through how this would work, right? My first one works totally fine. Everything is no problem. My next time through, my automation gets to this point and it fails, okay? Because it failed, it comes over here, get page source, clean page source, invoke ChatGPT, parse JSON response. And then what happens? Well, based on the logic right now, it would just go to the end and then start with the next one. But the next one may not have the same data needing to go to those exact same paths. So what we're going to do is add a loop inside of our loop that says, I want to try this 2 times, right? The first time may work, and that's awesome. The second time may work, and that's awesome too. I'm going to drag all of this inside of my loop of 2 times. So let's talk through this. The first time through, it worked successfully. Everything happened. Do I want to loop through twice in that case? Nope. I'm going to break. So I'm going to add a break right here. And what that's saying is break out of this loop. It's only going to break out of the one that I'm closest to right here. So I'm going to break out of that loop if I'm successful. If I fail, then we're going to go through here. All of this logic is going to run. Then we'll be on our second iteration of the loop. We've now set the fields for everything we want to have for our DOM-X paths, and we run back through here. Now, how does that actually apply to the fields? Well, we're going to have to go through here and change every single one of these to only look for the DOM-X path that we're specifying. Okay? So what I'm going to do is for each one of these fields, I'm going to uncheck input. I'm going to uncheck everything but the DOM-X path. That's the only field that I wanted to consider, the only object property. And instead of company name here, I'm going to map in company name DOM-X, right? Because that's where my DOM-X path is going to go on failure. We're going to talk about how do we fix the DOM-X path on success in just a second, okay? So this is what it should look like, and I can't see my screen over there. Yeah, you can see that, right? S company name is right here. That's the only property I wanted to consider. We're going to do the exact same thing for these next fields, okay? Just make sure that you get the right one. So customer ID, just keep saying that over and over to yourself until you actually map that field in. F2, customer ID DOM-X, and save. Okay, and again, that's the only field I'm mapping to. So I'm going to keep doing this for all 8 of these. Again, if you're watching live, you're stuck with me. If you are watching a recording later on, feel free to fast forward because this is not the most exciting thing. This was primary contact. I'm going to triple check that. Yeah, so I can see in the image here it was primary contact. We're good to go. Email address. I, like you, have to keep saying these over and over to myself so I don't mix up which one is which. This might be one of our longest bot builds, but I think it's an important concept to learn. And at the end of this video, I'll talk about some other tips for how you might apply this to real automations. Real meaning not the one that we're building right now for a challenge page, but real meaning like the ones that you're running in production. All right. Street address. Unchecking all of these. Mapping in the street address DOM-X. Okay. City, same thing. You might be able just to delete all the text and then leave it. I don't know if that works, but I know that this way works, and this is the way I like to do it. DOM-X for city. State is my weird one that it's a select. I'm going to uncheck that box still because my DOM-X path actually has the select word in it. So the HTML tag is a bit redundant, to be honest. State. And then my last one is zip. So again, uncheck all of those boxes. And set zip here. Zip DOM-X and save. All right, we're good to go. I'm going to click through these just to check one last time to make sure we've got all of these properties set correctly, because this is a long build and we don't want to just run it and have a bunch of errors. Okay, we did that correctly. Now, there's one other thing we want to consider here. The first time this runs, we now have empty variables that are set for all of our DOM-X paths. So what I'm going to do is add one more step here in between my 2 loops. And I'm doing it specifically in between my 2 loops because every time I'm starting fresh with a new record, I want to set those DOM-X paths back to their original state. Because sometimes we know the customer ID is actually, the customer ID field has an object ID of customer ID. Sometimes it's something crazy. So what I'm going to do here is say set defaults. And this gets back to what we did way earlier in the video, where we copied all of these. What we're going to do is we're going to use a bunch of set or assign string actions. And I'm just going to paste in exactly what we just had. So company name, and I'm going to select the S company name DOM-X path, right? I'm going to now paste that 7 times. And I'm going to go back through and fill all of them in correctly with the correct field mapping. And we've already got the variables set up, so it's really just putting in these input fields and then choosing which field they map up with. And we should be good to go once this is done. Email address. Okay. It's important to make sure you do this in between your 2 loops though. If your code isn't working, you may have put this inside of that iterator of 2 loop. And that is not what we want to do, because we want to make sure that we're not resetting these back to the default values in between our iterations of the loop, because that defeats the purpose of the ChatGPT part being involved. Zip and zip. All right. List view comes into handy for quickly reviewing these. Zip, state, city, street address, email address, primary contact, customer ID, company name. Looks good to me. The final thing we need to do, we should be done with this loop and enter step, is we want to click that submit button. So I'm just going to click add a couple times here until this one becomes highlighted. You could probably clone it anyway, but I just wanted to wait until it was highlighted to do my recorder step on that. Select browser, resiliency challenge, capture object, submit. Action to take, click, boom. All right. So again, what's happening here is we're going to try to download the file. We're going to loop through everything. We are going to try to enter the default values here for the DOM-X path, and that's what we're going to execute the first time through. If that fails, we're going to get the page source. We're going to clean the page source. We're going to send that to ChatGPT. We're going to parse the response. So at this point, we have new DOM-X paths for every single field. We're going to try this part again without resetting our field to default. And assuming it's successful, we'll then break, go to the next iteration of our loop. Let's close this out and give it a go. Oh, I got a bot error. Let's find out where that bot error is. Right here at the end. Oh, I selected get property instead of click. Sorry about that. There we go. Now we're good to go. Let's run it. So what would this look like in a real production-ish use case? I might want to move things like my DOM-X path to the credential vault or even to global values. And that would enable me to set them so that if the application changed, I'm not having to hit ChatGPT for an update on these paths every single time. Oh, you know what? We forgot to cancel those out. Let's stop the bot run because we don't want to have that influence our score. We forgot those message boxes. Shame, shame, shame. I'm going to comment them out here. Okay, there we go. Another interesting talking point here that I'll mention is when you're going through and capturing the page source, probably not for capturing the page source, but getting the response from ChatGPT, you may want to log that response, that JSON, so that you've just got this like huge log of all the results, specifically for this challenge page. Because what I want to do is make sure that ChatGPT is responding the same way every single time. If it's not, that may mean that I want to tweak my prompt a little bit so I'm getting a response in the format that I expect. I'm going to stop and watch here real quick. Okay, so we're good. It is working. Perfect. So when I was building this originally, went through and was logging every single one of those responses from ChatGPT, and I noticed that every once in a while, it would give me a different kind of response. And that's what led me to going so far as to saying, this is the format of the response that I want you to send me. And that way I got that JSON in the same way every single time. It wasn't like, hey, sometimes it gave me the DOM-X path in one format, sometimes it gave it in another. And so that was really important that I was able to see exactly what was being submitted every single time. The other thing I suggest for solving this challenge or any challenge is sometimes what I was doing is adding a screenshot action right before it clicked the add button. And that way, like if I got to the end and my data wasn't perfect, what I would do is just make sure that what I had captured on the screenshot matched exactly the data that I had in my CSV. And that way I could make sure that the two of those things matched up. All right, so our automation is almost done here. We can see, if you notice a couple of them, they were going really quickly. So that means it did go back to that original format where the company name was in the top left and it had an ID of company name. And that's totally great. We'd love to see that. Almost done, but it is working. My bot is resilient. It's able to keep up with these challenges. There, I got 100% time with 117 seconds. Hey, if you stuck with me through that whole build, my hat is off to you. Hopefully you learned something new. The most important thing I'm trying to stress when we do these kind of bot builds is not like how to solve this one thing, but I want to teach you how I'm thinking through solving problems. Because really, what we're doing here, yeah, we're building an automation, but we're solving problems, right? We're trying to think through, okay, this is the problem. How do I break that up into compartments or steps or logical flow in my head so that I can start to translate that with the actions and packages that I have? Last thing I want to cover here is some tips. So explore different models in ChatGPT or other generative AI providers. You can try out Google Bard. You could try out Anthropic using Claude. You could try Azure. You could try different models in ChatGPT. So if you want to use like DaVinci or GPT-4, you could try those. See if they're faster. See if you get a different result. See if they're cheaper in the way that tokens are consumed and things like that. Optimize your prompts. One great tip we saw previously was that people were actually asking ChatGPT for help in further optimizing their prompt. I think that's awesome. Really cool idea. So that could be another route that you could take to try to improve your automation build. JSON and XML parsing, right? Maybe get an XML back, maybe get a JSON back, maybe get some other format if you trust it to be returned correctly. Just make sure you know how to parse those. Again, this one's a little bit weird because we had to use that bracket notation because I use spaces. If you didn't use bracket notation, you could probably get away without having the brackets. Or I'm sorry, if you didn't use spaces. JavaScript. Consider asking ChatGPT to return query selectors instead of DOM-X paths. What does that mean for your speed, right? Hey, it returned a query selector and it told me exactly where to enter data for this particular object. If you did that in conjunction with the browser run JavaScript action or the web automation package, those would be cool approaches to try. Take screenshots before your submission if you're not getting 100% accuracy. Again, I mentioned that in the close there. This is a great way when you're thinking through running any automation. I'm just going to capture a screenshot just so I have a record of what was saved. If I'm doing a real automation, I'm probably going to want to make sure that I have something in place to do log management or screenshot management in this case. Like, hey, after 30 days, delete the screenshot because we probably aren't investigating stuff older than 30 days. And then finally, simplicity of logic over speed for maintainable automations. I tried to build out that automation in a way that the logic would make sense to most anyone and they could follow along and they would get it. I prefer automations that way because they're easy for other people to review and other people can kind of understand what's going on. That's why we add all the steps. That's why we tried to make the logic in a way that would really connect. We could probably go a little bit further by adding comments. I didn't do that in this case, but that would be another thing that's important as you're building in an enterprise situation. A couple issues you may face. If you're like me, you face a 401 because you can't copy an API key, so that's one. A 429 is too many requests, so you may have made too many requests in a short period of time. You could consider changing your subscription or your model for how you're consuming ChatGPT. A 400 is a bad request. So you may have tried to send the entirety of that page and maybe you got a bad request because you didn't have enough tokens set on the configuration of that particular action. It could also be again, this is if you're using like a real production situation, you have some illegal characters that were a part of your request. So maybe you had a bunch of like curly brackets that threw off the JSON format that was expected for the request body. So you may have to go through and start adding things like escape characters so that you're not having these illegal characters in the request body as you're doing like an API request to a generative AI model. All right, last two things here. I promise we're almost done. For swag, register for Bot Games Season 4. Make sure you do that. We've got a link below for that. Complete the challenges. Share a screenshot of your completion with the hashtag BotGames on social media. Tag myself, tag Arjun, tag Automation Anywhere. Tag 3 other automation developers. Challenge them to complete the exercise, and you could win some limited edition Bot Game swag. And we're excited to give that out. Now, we still have a lot of swag to give away. And we are prioritizing swag for people who complete the Trifecta challenge, which means you've completed all 3 Bot Games Season 4 challenges using the same name and the same email address. So we've got a link below so that you can claim that Trifecta certificate. Post that on social media. We want to celebrate the heck out of you because the Generative AI Bot Games was not an easy season. And so if you're able to complete all 3 of these, again, huge congratulations to you. This is a really forward-looking bot game season where we want people to be thinking about how can I combine the technologies of automation with generative AI. And a lot of organizations aren't there yet, but we want our automation developer community to already be thinking in that direction and already have some ideas in mind of how these 2 technologies can be combined to capture data in a new way, to communicate with customers or users in a new way, and to provide for better resiliency in our automations. So claim that Trifecta certificate, put it on social media, hashtag BotGames. We want to celebrate you. That was it. I know this was a long one. Again, I appreciate you staying with me that whole time doing this build. This is a really cool automation. I think it's a cool thing that you can go back and show your team and show them like, hey, we can build automations in a different way that they can be slightly more resilient than they were before. My name is Micah Smith. This has been Bot Games Season 4, Challenge 3. Go be great.